Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to tear up the textbook story of the Americas. You know, the one you learned in school? We're going to forget that simple picture of a sparse, primitive wilderness. Because the reality, the world before Columbus, was absolutely teeming with people, grand civilizations, and just breathtaking ingenuity. For decades, the story of how the Americans were populated seemed so simple, it was practically set in stone. You know the one. About 13,000 years ago, some hunters crossed a land bridge from Siberia, chased some mammoths down an ice-free corridor, and just like that, they became the first Americans. That was the Clovis theory. It was neat, it was tidy, and it was what everyone believed. But then, in 1997, that simple story completely fell apart. A single discovery threw the entire scientific community into, as one archaeologist put it, a state of turmoil. Suddenly, everything was up for grabs. So what was this bombshell? It was a settlement, found way down in southern Chile, thousands of miles south of that supposed land bridge. And radiocarbon dating proved that people were living there long before that ice-free corridor had even opened up. The whole timeline just shattered. It was like finding out people had been living in the house for a year before the front door was even built.
This just blows the whole thing wide open, doesn't it? If we were so wrong about the very beginning, what else did we get wrong about the Americas right on the eve of Columbus's arrival? Okay, let's start by just trying to grasp the sheer scale of the civilizations here. Down in South America, you had the Inca Empire, known to its own people as Tawantinsuyu. And this wasn't just some local kingdom. We're talking about a genuine continental power. By 1491, the Inca Empire was, it was colossal. Just try to wrap your head around this. It spanned 32 degrees of latitude. That is the same distance as from Stockholm, Sweden, all the way down to the Sahara Desert in Africa. It covered every single kind of landscape you can possibly imagine. And to put that into a global perspective, look at this. In 1491, the Inca ruled the largest empire on Earth. It was bigger than Ming China. It was bigger than Ivan the Great's Russia. It dwarfed any single state in Europe. This was not some isolated little kingdom. It was a global superpower of its day.
And how did they manage this huge territory? Well, they built a 25,000-mile road system, an absolute marvel of engineering that stitched together dozens of different cultures and languages. It's really no wonder that historians call them the most impressive empire builders of their time. Now, this kind of large-scale organization wasn't just in the mountains. The next great myth we need to tackle is this idea of a pristine, untouched Amazon rainforest. You know, the popular image is of this vast, empty jungle. But the ground itself tells a very different story, a story of incredible human engineering. You see, scientists started finding these huge patches of rich black soil called terra preta do Indio. And the thing is, this soil isn't natural, it's man-made. It's evidence of large-scale settled agriculture in a place that for the longest time we thought couldn't support it. And this wasn't some happy accident. This was a sophisticated, multi-generational project. It was basically a recipe for super soil. They would systematically mix charcoal and all sorts of nutrient-rich waste into the otherwise poor Amazonian soil. The result? Farmland so incredibly fertile that it's still being used today 1,000 years later. As soil scientist Bruno Glaser points out, this kind of thing just shouldn't exist according to the old textbooks. The very existence of terra preta is proof. It's undeniable proof that the Amazon was home to large, settled populations who were actively shaping their world on a massive scale. So, we have these vast empires, continent-spanning landscapes engineered by millions of people. Where did they all go? Why was this massive world so invisible to the first European settlers? Well, the answer is a catastrophe on a scale that is almost impossible to imagine. When the Europeans arrived, their most effective weapons weren't their guns or their steel swords. No, the real destruction came from invisible agents of death they brought with them. The germs and viruses carried by their livestock, like the pigs that marched along with Hernando de Soto's expedition. See, Europeans had lived side by side with domesticated animals for thousands of years. They had built up immunities to all the diseases that jump from animals to people. But Native Americans, who had very few domesticated animals, had no such defenses. Their bodies had never encountered these germs before. The consequences were absolutely apocalyptic. And if you want to see what that really looks like, look at the Caddoan people in the American Southeast. Before de Soto's expedition passed through their lands, their population was about 200,000 people. A short time after, it had collapsed to just 8,500. That is a drop of nearly 96%, almost everyone, gone. And that right there is how the myth of the empty wilderness was born. As anthropologist Russell Thornton explains, the complex urban societies were simply gone. They were wiped out by disease before many Europeans even laid eyes on them, creating the illusion of an empty land. But you have to wonder, why was this devastation so terrifyingly one-sided? I mean, why didn't Native American diseases just wipe out Europe in return? The explanation isn't about culture or character. It's rooted in the deep history of geography itself.
It really all comes down to animals. Eurasia was just lucky. It was home to a whole bunch of large mammals that were perfect for domestication, animals that gave meat, milk, leather, and muscle power. The Americas, on the other hand, because of massive extinctions during the last ice age, had very, very few. And that single difference, it changed everything. More domesticated animals in Eurasia meant more constant exposure to germs, which ironically built up stronger immunities over centuries. It also meant more power for farming and for warfare. It was a huge, accidental, but completely overwhelming advantage that had its roots in the deep past. So, when we picture the Americas in 1491, we shouldn't see a wilderness. We should see a world that was densely populated and highly organized. What the first Europeans actually walked into was more like a post-apocalyptic landscape, a world that had been recently and tragically emptied by disease. It was, in a very real sense, a widowed land. So, reframing this moment, it doesn't just change how we see the past. It changes our understanding of the present, of the very ground that's beneath our feet. It forces us to ask, what was lost? What was built in its place? And what does that legacy really mean for all of us today?